Welcome to the Contrarian Capitalist podcast. I'm delighted to be joined today by returning guest Tom Luongo, of course, of Gold, Goats and Guns. Tom, welcome back. How are you?
Good morning, Robert. How are you? How you been?
Very good, thank you. We were just both saying off air there, not enough coffee this morning, so I think we're going to be having that. And of course, a lot going on. But I first wanted to ask you, Tom, sentiment on the ground with regards to the current state of politics within the US, because
Mhm.
there's we can talk all day long about pros and cons, and people are going to agree, disagree. But when I was looking at what people are thinking about the midterms, it seems that the Democrats are heavily favoured to maybe take the House and the Senate. But that's why I thought I'd open with that question. What's the
Yeah,
boots on the ground?
yeah. There's lies, damn lies, statistics, polling, and British polling. Um, is the way I like to look at it. And then there's midterm elections polling when the oligarchy is on their last. They're this is their battle of the bulge, right? This is their last real attempt at attack before be honest with you, before the Americans roll everything up and say that's enough.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm gonna. I have been sounding this note for a while now as a kind of, I don't know, almost you know ultra ridiculous caricature of an American patriot in order to frankly tick everybody off, right? I've done it on purpose. It's kind of like it's again, it's like Patton. He said, when I want him to pay attention, I give it to him loud and dirty, right? The point being is that the strategy that Trump is employing, the changes that he's making fundamentally to the way the world is going to move capital and decide on how capital moves around the world, that is the heart of that's at the heart of the entire existing system that we've all lived under for years. And it's been, you know, it's been told to us that it's a petrodollar system, that it's an oil-based system, that's a this system, that's a that system. When the truth of the matter is, it's a legal system,
Mhm.
right? It's a series of qualifications that create trust. It's having bar association lawyers write contracts that people believe are airtight. It's having banks that you trust to move money from here to there. It's about insurance companies that you feel have the right amount of capital. It's that system. That's what we're fighting. That's what Davos really is. That's what City of London really is when I talk about these things. Trump is attacking all of that at root and branch. So is Xi, so is Putin. And that's what, you know, Rick's pay and all of these things, like the alternatives to Swift, alternatives to this, alternatives to that. That's what they're all effectively attacking. And Bitcoin, I might add, and other aspects of what cryptocurrencies have become. So when you ask yourself, and I'm getting around to the polling stuff in just a minute. So when you understand that that's what they're attacking, that's what Trump and team and the Third Army went to, Brussels, interestingly enough, to tell everybody, oh, by the way, we're blowing this open and we're opening up the siege. It's like the Battle of the Bulge. We're opening up Bastogne. Doesn't it just substitute Brussels for Bastogne? And we're saying we're here representing the rest of the world who does not believe like you that you have the right and purpose to rule the world from your technocratic high table. It's off. No, it's failed. It's not working. We're going to do this, and there's not a whole lot you can do about it.
Mhm.
That was what they said. That was their messaging all across the 300 people that they brought there, right? And they all walked away. No one got poisoned. No one got disappeared. No planes fell out of the sky. None of that stuff happened, right? Nobody showed up. The only person who showed up with a pair of glasses on holding an eye injury was Emmanuel Macron. So somebody else got thrown down the stairs by the large Mexican somebody paid $50 to rough up. And it wasn't Donald Trump. And it wasn't Scott Besson. And it wasn't Howard Lutnick. And it wasn't Jameson Greer. I didn't see them walking out of dinners throwing down their microphone, throwing a fit of pique, Adam's apple all a quiver, and then running back to their office and at the ECB, Christine Lagarde. Right? I didn't see any of that from the American side.
Mhm.
I saw nothing but Americans walking in and going, because fuck you, that's why. Like I have to like put it in those terms. We're America. We're doing this. We need Greenland. We need this. We need that. We need this. We need that. We're doing all of this, and there's nothing you can do about it. Is there anything the Europeans can do to us financially that can actually hurt us? No. Trump, I can't do anything to us. And then they tried and it failed completely. So when you ask yourself the question, what's going on with the midterms? This is where I've been screaming about, you know, don't believe for a second that anybody who has the magic secret to polling in America means anything. How any of that translates into votes. Because at the end of the day, for my patrons, I did an entire what I call market report. So every Wednesday, every Sunday, my patrons get a private podcast. That's what they pay for of me, yeah, and my latest ideas that came out of my, crazy old noggin. And I had to remind them that, oh, by the way, I get to put my, genitalia on the table. And it's that I'm a former scientist and I've forgotten more about statistics than most people have ever learned. And I can tell you right now that first and foremost, any poll that has a 4% margin for error is useless. It's mostly measuring noise, and it all has at the assumption that a poll today can translate into an outcome tomorrow, right? Otherwise, why are we using data? Data that just like measures something in the void means nothing. If the data cannot be applied to a hypothesis that can then prove or disprove said hypothesis, what's the point of the data, right? I took some data points. What do they mean? I don't know. Well, they say this. Well, that means that's nice, but what variables did you control for? What did you do here? What did you do there? What is that in what context does that data actually exist? Those numbers are nice, but they don't mean anything. Maybe they're the beginnings of a hypothesis, right? And 90% of what we respond to in the media when people are like posting these studies that 97% of scientists agree that climate change, blah, 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 blah. All that's like meta-analysis, what we call fishing expeditions in scientific terms. These are experiments designed to be fishing expeditions to try and find hypotheses to go and explore and go after, as opposed to things where as opposed to hypotheses that have been tested, you can draw conclusions from. So back to the polling question. Polling that does not translate directly to a known 95% confidence interval overtaken over, with big data sets to tell you, yeah, that's going to lead to that outcome is useless and is nothing more than gaslighting. Okay. And you have to wrap your head around this. Does not matter how much you trust the pollster. Does not matter the pollster's political bent. Does not matter whether they profess to be all in for Trump or they're Quinnipiac, and we know that they work for the Democrats. Like, it doesn't matter where the source comes from. Ultimately, at this point, the polls are designed to get. Most of them are designed to get the worst data imaginable. They're designed to get the data they want to get. They beg the question. They write the questions in a particular way that people will answer in a particular way that will give them the answer that they want, so that they can go and write a headline or write a tweet or ask for money or whatever it is that whatever their grift is, right? And the goal is to push public opinion in that direction. Now, let's add one more layer to this, because this is a very important part of the conversation. This is about data quality, right? This is about all of this stuff. Now let's add the next part of it. What's the underlying assumption to our to all of this polling, that it can, at the end of the day, predict an outcome or lead us towards an outcome in 9 months from now? Okay, great. To what degree of certainty? What's the certainty? What's the underlying assumption about our elections themselves? Because that's the ultimate data point. We're going to count some friggin' votes. We're going to get an outcome, and then we're going to try and correlate polling results from a certain point in time to something else, right? to another event in the future. In that event, we need to know the precision and accuracy of the elections themselves. Not only do we need to know the precision and accuracy of the polling, but we need to know the precision and accuracy of the thing that we're trying to predict with the polling, which is the election. And for almost all of my life, we all just assumed that, uh, elections were about 0.5% accurate, that there's
Mhm.
0.5% worth of human error, corruption, this, that, everything else, difference in voting systems. At the end of the day, that's why like most states in the United States have a 0.5% recount rule or whatever, because that's what people have kind of determined through a lot of polling over, a lot of election results and election mathematics and election statistics over time. Said, yeah, these polls are about 0.5% accurate. So, or elections are themselves. So, in order to strip all that out, we may have to go back and do a mandatory recount or this and that in order to try and find any of the errors that were made. Some errors we're never going to be able to correct. We're going to have to assume, we're going to have to just accept that margin for error at the end of the day and move on with our lives, because that's just the way things are, right? Is that a good assumption? Knowing full well that our elections in the United States are anywhere from 5 to 15% inaccurate, because that they're making numbers up in places like Fulton County and
Mhm.
Arizona and Los Angeles, and dead people are voting, and this is, and ballot harvesting, and this, that, and everything else. Why do you assume that? So, like, for example, we have a 3 to 4 seat majority in the House of Representatives, which is a Six Sigma outlier relative to the amount of electoral votes and the type and kind of electoral votes in the swing counties and everything else that Donald Trump won in 2024. He should have walked in with like 40 seats. Should have walked in with +8 in the Senate, 45, 50 seats in the House, and he should be passing his entire agenda within. He should have been able to pass his entire agenda for the entire 4 years in the first 2 weeks. And so
Mhm.
far, our Congress has passed what, 5 pieces of legislation in a year. It's the lowest number by, Six Sigmas going back to the beginning of the founding of the Republic. Yeah, these are Six Sigma outliers here, folks. This is the reality. The reality is that Trump should have never lost the 2020 election. They knew they couldn't stop him in the 2024 election, so they stole 40 to 50 seats in the House. And now we have Republican pollsters like Rich Barris and Mark Mitchell at Rasmussen and the rest of them all screaming that Trump's going to lose the midterms because he's not getting his agenda passed because of this, and this. And it all sounds really reasonable,
Mhm.
except
Mhm.
for the fact that there's 9 months between now and then, and we're literally watching the roll up Antifa at record rates in Minneapolis after the insurrection there. We're watching housing prices come down and gasoline prices come down and food prices come down in the United States because the illegals are all self-deporting and or getting sent on C-130s and sent back where they belong, right? And that's taking marginal demand off of that and all of those sectors: healthcare, emergency room visits, housing, all of it. And all of a sudden, we're watching a drop in valuations on all of those assets. Food, we still have a real problem with food. I mean, beef is way too expensive. It's not going to get any better anytime soon. But that's just math at this point. Um, that's just biology and math at this point. There's nothing we can really do about it other than turn all the cornfields in Iowa who are currently out there making ethanol and turn them all back in the grasslands and put fucking cows on it and expand herds. But it'll still take 5 years
Mhm.
to start really expanding herds, because that's just the math of cows. There's nothing you can do. It takes 5 years to replace a heifer. It takes 3 years to replace a meat cow. Like, that's just the way it is. Like, there's nothing you can do about that. Maybe 3, maybe 4, whatever. But any heifer you slaughtered 3 years ago, you're still 2 years away from actually ensuring that you replaced her,
Mhm.
because you've lost production. You may have replaced her, but you've lost the production. So in order to get the production back to the levels that it was, plus the amount of heifers you had, in order to get back to where you were when you slaughtered the heifer, you got to go 5 years. So we're not going to get. That's just not going to change. There's nothing you can do about that other than incentivize farmers to you know grow better cows faster with better nutrition, better land, yada yada yada, and try and speed up that cycle. So, meaning that maybe you get a twin here or there or whatever, that
Mhm.
kind of thing. I mean, I know with goats that having raised goats, that the more you feed them, the more chance that you're going to get doubles, you're going to get twins triplets and quads. Now, the poor goat giving birth to quads. Oh my God, the poor things. If you've ever seen a goat about ready to give birth to quads, you're like, at that point, you're like, any male that on the planet does not feel for that woman. Like, seriously, dude, that's horrible. Like they are like this big, and they waddle like this, and it's impressive, right? And I've heard goats having as many 6 kids at a time, which is just insane. And you hope that they don't all just get tangled up in there and then all die and take the mom with her and everything with them and everything else. But that way off target. But my point about all this is that you're hearing one thing overseas. Your media over in Britain and over in Europe is fundamentally going to give you the worst version of reality for the United States that they can, because that's their incentive.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't matter. So you're going to hear all. So the big one that I see is that from the classic regime polling organizations in the United States, Politico, Ipsos, Quinnipiac, all the other ones, the Washington Post, all that, they're all saying that Trump's approval rating is like the highest it's ever been. Okay. And it's only it's interestingly enough, it's only the Republican pollsters, the ones that are associated with that have the deepest relationships with Steve Bannon, who go on his podcast all the friggin' time. That are the ones that are crashing out right now. Interestingly enough, and what did we find out about Steve Bannon and the Epstein files? All the other stuff about Epstein, low T, transgenderism, this, that, everything. Well, none of that matters. The only thing in the Epstein files that I found remotely interesting whatsoever was he was sitting there talking with Steve Bannon about how to get rid of Jerome Powell.
Wow.
Okay. Now, what my argument about Powell is, and I can tell you flat out that, that's again, backdoor confirmation that one, Bannon never stopped being Navy intelligence. And that he's, his shtick is China, right? Well, guess what? You have the British. See, this is the fun part about Davos / the high table. I'm going to lay this one out for you. You're gonna love this. So when they want the Americans to do something, what do? They gaslight them. They give them false antipodes. They give them false dyads. Say, if not Russia, then we have to go to war with China. If not A, then B, right? Mm-hmm. Well, you have to have different sectors of the commentariat to push to gaslight Americans in different directions. So you have the British press and the Europeans constantly focusing on, oh my God, Russia, oh my God, and the intelligence services and everything else. You bait Russia into starting a war with Ukraine, then you just keep pounding that point over and over and over and over, even though clearly NATO is the aggressor here. That no, we need to go to war with the Russians because the Russians are the enemy. Well, then you have the insurrectionist wing, the supposed conservative wing of the commentariat of the intelligence services. And they are led in this case by Steve Bannon, Ted Cruz, the Tucker Carlson, blah blah blah, all screaming about China. So yeah, no. For the people that aren't convinced, like myself, they were trying to take people like myself who are like, no, the Russians aren't a threat. The rail games, their military logistics can't attack Poland if they wanted to, right? They don't have the military logistics once their rail gauge ends because they don't know how to. They can't do supply lines beyond Poland. They could bomb Poland, but who cares? Can't occupy it. Can't move troops in there. They don't have a navy to speak of. Like how are the Russians going to take, Warsaw? Mm-hmm. They're not. So you look at that and you say, oh, okay, the Russians aren't a threat. Well, for people like that who go, the Russians aren't a threat, you have to give them a pre-planned script as to who the threat really is. Enter Steve Bannon and that wing, who then says, no, it's China. Meanwhile, the Chinese don't want a war with us any more than the Russians do. It's all bullshit. Mm-hmm. But you can write polls. You can sit there and do podcasts and have media and everything else in order to move public opinion. Then you write a couple of polls and say, yep, Americans are really worried about China, because you program that into their head. Okay, this is what narcissists do. They program buttons into you, and then they poke those buttons, and then, oh, look, what a shock. We get the behavior that we want. This is what's going on at every level. This is the level of psyop that we're dealing with at this point. This is how dangerous all this is. And this is why Steve Bannon, after all these years, has finally outed himself as to who he actually freaking works for, and everyone in his orbit. And if you watch the MAGA crowd that is in his orbit, the Marjorie Taylor drama queens, the Robert Barneses, the Rich Barrises, the Mark Mitchells, all the Ted Cruzes, everybody who's a regular on his podcast, you will see exactly the same messaging over and over and over again. Trump isn't arresting enough freaking people. It's radicalizing the youth. He's going to lose the midterms because they're all going to stay home. And he needs to stop playing footsie with China. Same thing over and over again. And it's just nothing more than propaganda and gaslighting in order to get people to adopt that position. Not that's the position that people had previously adopted. And you give the imprimatur that that's what the reality is by then having a pollster going out, writing a push poll, and then going, see? And all they have to do is have been correct about things in the past because, well, hey, we know how much they're going to cheat.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We know that they're measuring bad numbers. And even if they're doing so in good faith, I'm not even saying, like, for example, that Rich Barris is like creating polls in bad faith. I'm just saying he's measuring noise. And he's measuring imprecise and inaccurate data on the assumption that they're both precise and accurate when they're not, because the election outcomes have nothing to do with reality, because the election outcomes were faulty in the first place, because the election outcomes were gamed to the polls, as opposed to the polls reflecting the election outcomes. No, they write the polls and then they game the election outcomes to make the polls look prescient. That's the gig. Okay? That's the game. And if you don't think they're not working that shit out at, Evil Corp Central and GCHQ and on the high table or whatever metaphor you want to use, if you don't think that that's not what they're doing at this point, given the fact that Donald Trump and Scott Bessent and everybody else and Xi and Putin and everyone else is all off the bandwagon and want a new system for the movement of capital, which is what their empire actually is, their empire actually is, then why do you think you're even a commentator in this space? I mean, I know no lie. Like, this is the key. Like, this is the discussion we should be having about all of this. Because if you don't think that those people are not going to throw everything imaginable, including the threat of like nuclear war and everything else at us to stop that from happening, you're not a serious person. And, I'm not saying that I'm the only serious person here, because I'm not. I know there are plenty of serious people out there and they mean well, but let's have that conversation, because that's the conversation we're not allowed to have. No. The minute you start to have that conversation, the Jews, the this, the that, something else, they throw everything imaginable at you. The last week it was Moltbook and the fact that Skynet was self-organizing in real time. And by Friday they were going to nuke us all, right? Like, what's next? Locusts? With these freaking people? And they bomb gold and silver at the same time to remind everybody that they know what that they're in charge. It's all that speech from John Hurt from B for Vendetta when he turns to Mr. Dascom, the guy who's in charge of the BTN, the British news. I need a 24-hour campaign blitz to remind these people why they need us. Everything, war, famine, plague, pestilence, locust, all of it, every day, and why we're necessary. That's where Davos is right now. That's what they're throwing at us. That's what you have to worry about. And so, yeah, it looks from together when they control the media. Why do you think they're raiding Elon Musk offices in Paris? Why do you think they're prepping billions and billions of dollars worth of fines against all the American media companies? As far as I'm concerned at this point, like, if Brussels attempts to do that, Trump should just say, or whomever should just say to, my friend Blaine Holt and the C-17s, the snake eaters, they drop in on C-17s, just go in and start, saying, no, we're invading you now. Done. No, off. No, you're not doing that. You're not going to run our elections for us from Brussels. And if you think you're going to do that, well, y'all are going to get subsonic 300 blackout in the back of the head. Because that's where this goes. Because what they're doing is they're prepping for violence. They're saying they're willing to use any amount of violence imaginable. Did you see what they just what they're pulling off? They're trying to pull off in Minneapolis. What they're setting up in places like
Mhm.
Washington, Oregon, L.A., and everywhere else. You don't think that they're not prepping for violence? But we're not allowed to use violence. We're not even allowed to talk about it. We're not even allowed to talk about the fact that this thing is going to that they have been issued terms of surrender. That's what Davos was, and they all said no. I said, okay, we're going to fight it out to the end then. And I as an American who has his eyes open, not closed, and not looking at and no longer bamboozled by Iranian media propaganda, Russian propaganda, and Chinese propaganda, and City of London propaganda, looking at this going, every time anybody says that they're going to stand up to the United States, when the minute the United States walks in the room and puts their foot on the table and goes, you know what? No, we're not doing that. Everybody goes, oh really? I guess we're not doing that, and everybody stands down. Have we watched the Russians stand up to us and Trump? No, they're clearly he and Putin and Trump are working together. Have you seen the Chinese stand up to the United States when we're pressuring Iran? Like Iran is the linchpin to Belt and Road, the international North-South transport corridor, everything else. And Trump is like, oh, by the way, we're going to kill the Iran. We're going to end the axis of resistance. And you know why? We're going to end the axis of resistance because that's how they get the international North-South transport corridor and how they get Belt and Road. They know that British and French fuckery, for lack of a better term, in Iran and control over the IRGC and Hezbollah and this, that, and everything. You understand. They understand. You get rid of them and everything calms down. And the Chinese go, yeah, okay, we have to pay full price for oil, but we get to move our goods around without any worry. And the Iranians get to re-enter the global economy for the first time in 75 or 80 years, or since they overthrew since MI6 overthrew Mossadegh and blamed it on the CIA. I think that should be Richard Poe's next book, how MI6 has taken over the world but blamed it on the CIA. I think that should be his next book, if you want my honest opinion. But I'm not saying that the CIA is like you know, not guilty here, but like we always seem to get blamed for everything when MI6 is doing all the freaking terrible work. So there you go. All right, that was my opening monologue. What else do you want to talk to me about?
Tom, well, you mentioned, well, there's so many different ways to take that,
Of course,
to be
of
honest.
course.
You mentioned silver, and I know that you've recently done a video or on another show, and you
Mm,
spoke about JP Morgan's involvement. Obviously, we're seeing a lot of
mm,
increased volatility. So again, let's
mm.
go behind the scenes. What happened, why, and what can we likely expect moving forward?
Oh, we can expect an epic fight for what's going on. I think JP Morgan is I don't think JP Morgan is the problem in this. I think they're the solution. I think it's BofA and Citigroup and others. And I don't have like receipts for this or anything, but you
Mhm.
hear enough scuttlebutt around the industry and people talking and people who know, and then you hear this and like JP Morgan's talking about $10,000 gold by the end of the year. He's a senior analyst at JP Morgan Chase is talking about $10,200 gold by the end of the year. That's a doubling of the gold price. Now, in for most of my life, a senior analyst at JP Morgan writing an investor note like that would have immediately been fired and it probably would have never been published. And now it's going out. That tells you it's a sea change. That Morgan is become the mouthpiece for the administration and for American policy when it comes to precious metals, because they're the sole custodian of gold and silver for GLD and SLV and all of these minerals, right? And all of these metals. And therefore, they can control the flow to the futures exchanges to deliver physical metal onto these exchanges. So it's everybody else who's short. Now, I mean, so is Morgan net long as it's been reported, or are they net short? Remember, the bullion banks, and this is where you should have my friend Vince Lonchi come on, because Vince will explain the structure of the market to you far better than I could, because,
Mhm.
well, Vince explains it to me and then I remember 70% of it and then don't remember the critical 30%, and then I sound like a lunatic. So, um, but I understand it, but I can't. There's things in this life, especially when you're someone like myself, and the way my brain organizes information. I understand that once I get the broad strokes of it and what it all means, I don't remember all of the I'm not particularly great at remembering all the very, very fine little details
Mhm.
until they're necessary. I'm like, I only focus on the things that matter relative to where my focus is at that point. And that's when you go back and you have another conversation with somebody who, to get confirmation of, am I remembering this right? And then I have to go back and like literally have to relearn the same thing 3, 4 times. So the, the long and the short of it, all puns intended, of course, um, is that a bank like JP Morgan wants on their commodities desk want to be net neutral. So if they're long silver because they bought some from a miner, they then put a net short on in the futures market. But they also have a prop trading desk, right? They also have, well, not prop trading, but whatever the fuck they call it now after Dodd-Frank. They have a trading desk, and that trading desk can be directional long or short for their institutional clients.
Mhm.
And that's where the confusion lies. So I think I have that right when I say it that way. And so that's what you have to watch for. And that's why it's easy for people to write commentary or make commentary about the markets. Oh my God, the banks are 280 million ounces short. Is that in what area of the bank? Is it in their commodity trading desk, which is where they would normally be, where it would show up as they're short? Because they're long in other areas, right? Because they bought a whole bunch of silver and they're sending it to the refiner to send to the exchange to sell, and and during that time period, they're going to be structurally short to hedge that risk in the futures market, or is it their prop trading? Is it their institutional trading desk that's net long or short? And that's the better question. And I think that's the kind of nuance we should be asking of the people who actually follow this stuff on a daily basis. I don't follow the guts of the market that way on a daily basis. I just don't. God, I don't have the bandwidth for it. If I did that, I wouldn't be able to do anything else, right? So I lead you. I bring this stuff up in this way and answer that question in order to remind people of what you should be looking for, what answers you should be you know you should be trying to get for yourself, and of course what questions you podcasters like yourself should be asking. See,
Mhm.
this would be the question of like, I would sit down with Vince to chat with him, or I was going to sit down with like a guy like Craig Hemke or something. This is the question I would ask them, right? Like, do you, or Chris Marcus or whomever, I would be like, what are you seeing? Are you seeing directional long shorts, long or short positions at both of the here that, what are you seeing? And, because they're going to know where to look because that's where their focus is. And I don't, that's not what I do. Right. I'm much more of a macro thinker. So that being said, I can't tell you that's the long answer. The short answer is, I think so. So, um, I would say look at both. Look at Citigroup, look at a couple of others, and then I would ask. And the other thing, and I've brought this up before. I brought those two up before because I keep asking a question because this is what I keep hearing, right? So I'm more interested in them being long, structurally short or long silver
Mhm.
in at this point in time because they've known this is my okay. Let's go back to um what I've been talking about since SOFR, right? SOFR versus LIBOR, all that stuff, right? Why I think that Steve Bannon trying to get rid of Jerome Powell with Jeffrey Epstein is the most consequential bit of the Epstein files. Well, it's because Powell was the guy changing the architecture of how dollars flow around the world and who gets to price those dollars, and that's very important. And if Bannon works for City of London, he of course would want to stop that,
Mhm.
right? Let's just call a spade a spade. So Powell then becomes his enemy, right? Now, that could be the wrong answer, right, to that question. It could be. It could absolutely be the wrong answer to why these two are having that conversation. I'll believe it when I see it. Because if that is the case, if Powell was setting that table, now you have to ask yourself, that's 2018, right? SOFR's in pilot project by this point. It's going to come. It's going to happen by 2022. Why in 2026, after SOFR's been implemented for 4 years, LIBOR is dead. Synthetic LIBOR is dead. All of it's gone. Eurobond, I mean, all of it. The world prices are based on silver now. Why are these guys still short silver? Why wouldn't they be on board with the change to the system if they, can
Mm.
see it coming? They can see it coming better than me. They're BOFA. They're Citigroup. I'm just some fucking dude sitting in a trailer in rural Tennessee. I can see it. Why can't they see it? So when you ask that question that way, now you got to go,
Mm.
oh, maybe they are short for a reason. Maybe they are lying in wait. Their balance sheets now become nuclear bombs, just waiting to go off, sitting in silos. They're the threat sitting on, that are being pointed at Trump. Don't do this, or we're going to blow them up, because everybody else has gotten religion. Apparently, they're all shifting their balance sheets around and doing what they need to do. Hell, J.P. Morgan and Goldman Sachs are telling everybody what to fucking do, and yet these guys are refusing to do so. So then you got to ask yourself the question: oh, who are they working with?
Mm.
What side do they play? What side do they play for? And why would they continue to take their orders that way? Do they really think Trump is going to lose, and that this is all just still a temporary phenomenon, and by 2028 they're going to be able to ride out whatever happens, and then they're going to swoop in 2029 and they're going to be in charge because Davos is going to win and London is eternal and blah 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 blah? Really? I wouldn't take that bet. And if I'm a bank, like, and if I'm an over leveraged bank like Citigroup or BofA or whatever, I mean, maybe they're trapped. Maybe they can't even get out from underneath it. I don't know. I'm asking that question because go back to, and I asked that question now because 4 years ago or 3 or 4 years ago, when Archegos Capital blew up, right? Which, Bill Wang and Archegos Capital blew up and attacked the prime brokers that had given them all this money, and he just, like, his portfolio went to nothing, and they shut the doors, and all of a sudden the 8 smartest banks in the world acted like the dumbest rubes, like, in a Telegram chat, for Christ's sake, getting run by Indian scammers, right? Um, because this guy, a convicted felon, is able to, go and pledge the same capital 8 times as collateral to go build a portfolio, and then the portfolio moves against him. The whole thing, the whole thing collapses as Ponzi schemes do, and he shuts the door and runs away, and we've never hear from him again. And I wrote a piece, and I called it Archegos Bikini Atolls, right? Bikini Atoll, where we tested the atom bomb. Like, maybe that was just sitting there the entire time, waiting for something to blow up, some other area of the market to blow up, that would blow up his trade, that would then wipe out their capital, and then put them on the back foot, needing a bailout, needing this, needing that. Or will there be any contagion effect? Or was it just simply, oh, by the way, we have 100 of these,
Mm.
and they're bigger than Archegos. So, hey, boy, go fetch me my slippers and a gin. Okay? Because you're not getting out from underneath this. That's the way the game's played. And, giving Bill Wang a couple $100 million to, play that game with. So now, is BOFA just another Archegos? That's what I'm asking. I'm not telling you that it is. Okay.
Mm.
I'm not saying this. I definitively, I know this. I don't fucking play that game. I just don't play that game. I play this is a scenario that's interesting now, isn't it? And, you know, we're trained in this industry. I've been writing a newsletter for Newsmax for 13 years now. We're trained like politicians are trained. We're trained to lead and be definitive, and that's what people want. And I literally, that's what my editors told me from the beginning when they were teaching me how to write these things. I'm like, that's a really dumb way of doing it. That's really brittle, because what happens when you're wrong? Oh, I know what
Mm.
happens when you're wrong. You get fired as an editor, and then you go on to you have to go and do something else and start another newsletter. That's what happens. But if you take the position of trying to teach people how to fish, as opposed to giving them fish and thinking that the fish is the only the fish, the stock pick or whatever, is the reason that they're tuning in. you build a much more durable relationship with your subscriber base. They learn how to actually invest, trade, take profits, do everything they want to do. And you leave them with questions and you empower them and give them agency because they're ultimately the ones making the decisions anyway. I
Mm.
see this in the financial commentary ad everywhere. There's this whole Wall Street, you know, politician, never show weakness mindset. And I find that just completely and utterly baffling because I don't think it drives authenticity. And then I have to ask the question, well, if that's all you can do, again, why were you trained that way? When you're wrong and then you just pull the Donald Trump thing. Well, I wasn't wrong. They never apologize and move on. I always like, oh, no, I was wrong about that. Right. But being wrong is interesting because I'm a scientist. To me, like being wrong is just as important as being right. Because I go, oh, well, I can take that and I can take it off I can take it off the game. I can take it off the whiteboard and go, up, oh, that didn't work. Okay, cool. It means I don't have to I can scrub that from my brain now, and I can use that part of my brain for something else and for more useful stuff. And this is, I find that brittle is the real word for me. There's a lot of people out there, when they're really good at bamboozling, or just schmoozing the fact that they've got a really brittle model, and you don't want to do that. You want to build resilient models of how the world operates, and you want to be willing to be wrong and everything else. And I just don't see it. And I'm not going to name names now, but I just find this is part of the confusion in the zeitgeist in the space. Everybody's looking for answers, and the gurus are all out there going, "I have the answer," and then they turn out to be wrong, and you're like, "Now what?"
Mm.
Right? And what I'll tell you is, look here, 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 and here. And I'll give you 6 places to look. And if 4 or 5 of them turn out to be areas of interest and they all align with an idea, but 1 or 2 of them don't, well, that's the process by which you winnow out, the you winnow out the stuff that's not real. Because eventually you certain aspects of the game board become, some areas of the game board become uninteresting to you, right? Or we can say, well, definitively over here, Powell doesn't work for Davos, for example. Like I can say that without any uh that any ambiguity. Okay,
Mm.
none. I am convinced of that. Period. At the same time, I can believe that Powell also wants to defend the Fed as an institution because he's been a member of the Fed for 15 years now, or however long it is. I can believe all of these things at the same time. So but I think his heart's in the right place. So therefore, because he wouldn't have implemented SOFR, he wouldn't have done this, he wouldn't have done that, he wouldn't do all these things, right? And then, but that doesn't mean that he doesn't make mistakes. Doesn't mean he doesn't have other agendas. Doesn't mean he doesn't have other competing things in his head. Doesn't mean that he thinks that Donald Trump is right about everything either. By the way, it's allowed to be an independent person. But I can take that off the game board. I don't have to worry about that. 4 years ago, I was like, is Jerome Powell really the secret weapon we all have? Is he really the secret, American patriot? Remember that? That's where we were
Mhm.
4 years ago, right? Today, I can say that without, but it took at least 2 years worth of observing Powell to be able to make that statement with an increasing amount of statistical certainty, where the 95%, bring it all the way back to polling, 95% confidence interval that Powell is a patriot, not noise. Not a, but that takes time, and that takes nuance, and that takes, repetition, and it takes all of those things. So I don't know. That's where I think we are right now. I don't know where you want to go from there, but we'll do that.
Yeah, Tom, that's well, just a couple of points on that. If you would be willing to have a chat
Hmm.
with Vince, because I've tried reaching out a couple of times, no dice so far. I appreciate he's a busy guy, so if you could put in a good word for me, that would be
Sure, I can do that.
awesome. I
Yeah,
appreciate
the other
that.
thing is I've already talked to Ben, so we have to do another podcast because we have so much he and I need to talk about. But just to give you an idea, at that point, Vince is a busy guy, and he's becoming more and more popular by the day, and well deserved because he's fucking a house on fire.
Hmm.
And Yeah, I love Vince to death, man. Like all the people in my circle, the people that I interact with on a regular basis in this circle, I just find are some of the finest people I've ever met in my entire life. And so, um, warts and all, we're all flawed and everything else, but they're just fine people. Alex Craner and Blaine
Mhm.
Holt and all of these people, Suzuki Kenda, like that. This what I'm beginning to call the intellectual dark web, and it's just hilarious, and how right and you know um even we all learn off each other and all riff off each other because we all have various areas of expertise. Like I said, understands the plumbing better than
Yeah.
I understand. I understand the friggin' I understand the corruption. He understands the plumbing. Someone else understands the history. Someone else understands things from that. Has the European version of it. Matt Eric's got the Canadian history version of it. Right. Everybody's got a little. Blaine Holt and the Ian Burlingame have got military logistics and that kind of thing behind them, blah, 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 right? So, and then the rest of us, try and fill in what we know, what we don't know, and then and then you go from there, and we see where we wind up, and I know we're right, I know we're over the target because we're starting
Mhm.
to take unbelievable amounts of flack before we start, as we're starting to break through and there's clearly a crust, there's a glass ceiling, and I think guys like Steve Bannon are clearly a part of it that are trying to keep us out of breaking through to the next level. A lot of it is inertia. A lot of it is just um, the bias of the people who are their own personal bias and imprinting and the way they see the world. And it's not nefarious or anything like that. Don't get me wrong. I'm like, oh, I'm not grousing about not having a bigger following. I will never do that. Every day I get up and I'm like, why the fuck does 76,000 people follow me on Twitter? I'm such an asshole, right? But but it seems to work, so I continue doing it. But it's like that's the thing, and I will never grouse about it at all. Every day I wake up and I'm like, oh, I'm so thankful I don't have to do anything else for a freaking living because this is great because I get to indulge all of my hobbies other than playing music and and do the thing every day. I get up every day. It's great. So um, I can't argue with it.
That is a level of self-gratification that we shouldn't take for granted. Thank you on Vince. I appreciate that. The second point I just wanted to make because I've
Sure.
been almost criticised a little bit about this, about my writing is too loose because it's well, if I
Mm,
say, well, this is likely to happen or that might not happen. I just want to go back to the point you just made that
mm.
the reason I do that is okay, there's a bit of Britishism there, say something and do something else, whatever. But actually, you are
Sure.
right. What if I am wrong? And therefore I can point back and go, well, it's nothing's a guarantee in life. That's why it's so just to
Yeah.
quell that as well. I find that an interesting point.
No, it is a really important point. I used to write. I mean, I used to, go back and read the old blog posts on Gold on my website, and you'll see very likely blah blah blah, or this is what I did. I do a lot of the if this is this is that. But at the same time, you're like, and I go back and over and I read a lot of that stuff, and I'm like, wow, you were like way too arrogant there. You should have
Mm.
been. You should have been qualifying some of that stuff. And as I get older, I make sure that I spend a lot more time qualifying, not because I'm not convinced, not because I don't think, in my heart of hearts, what I mean is the back of my head, I'm like, yeah, I'm probably right about this. Like, just sitting there going, yeah, no, I'm almost like, yeah, I know I'm right about this or whatever. You have those moments. But when you present it to somebody else that you're trying to make it, you have to remember to teach people how to, see your process, right?
Mhm.
That's what's important. And then they see your process and they say, this is why you've come to these conclusions, or most likely have come to these conclusions. Great. We're not writing, a lot of this, we're not talking about this stuff or writing stuff in any way that is actionable or legalistic or anything else. It's what we're doing is trying to, trying to figure out scenarios here. And, you just want to be like you play it out. You're going to say, why are you doing X, Y, and Z, dude? That doesn't make any sense to me. And, you know, we're at a moment in time where where everybody is clarifying what side they're on,
Mhm.
right? Who they actually work for. All the games of, obfuscating, what agenda you actually represent is, out the window. And I'm going to be frank and honest. My agenda is very simple. I think the United States needs to win. because I think the United States, by virtue of the fact that we were the colony that got away, created the first written constitution in the world that put we the people above the sovereign state, I think is a very important thing. And I think it's a very important responsibility and burden that we as Americans have to the rest of the world to make sure that we follow that through to the end in order to prove to the old oligarchy, to the old kings of the kings of old and the philosophy, whatever, Davos, the high table, whatever you want to call them, that we're right and they're wrong. Because they want to prove that humanity needs to be led by them. And we want to prove humanity needs no leader. We want to be a little bored. We want to be a little Boromir here, Gondor needs no king. Gondor has no king. Gondor needs no king, right? But Boromir is not. Boromir doesn't believe that. He does believe that Gondor needs a king. He just doesn't believe that at that point. He doesn't believe that Aragorn needed to be king, like because he didn't trust Aragorn. That's a different dynamic. But there's a little bit of that where we don't need them. There's another. We can submit to something, you call it God, the universe, whatever you want to call it, but it ain't Schwab, and it ain't Jacob Rothschild, and it ain't the King of England, and it ain't, the CEO of BOFA, and it ain't fucking Larry Fink, and it ain't these people. Now, Fink has obviously been neutered, so he's off the table. But that's where we have to have our head. And that's why the United States has to win. That is my agenda. It's nothing more complicated than that. And it took me a long time to get back to that. When I'm like, oh, look, America's trying to lead and trying to be the country that I grew up believing it was. And then you go out in the desert for 40 years or so and walk around and go, oh, wow, this is the terrible place that, we've become. And now we're waking up. We're going to fix it. People actually want what I want. It's still there. All right, all in. And you have to be all in. That doesn't mean you have to give up all of your analytic reasoning as to whether or not you're going to win. But your agenda is, I want to win. I want to win and go home. Are we going to win and go home? Oh, that's what we do podcasts for.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
100%. Just before we polish up, I just want to run past you something I've been thinking. You can tell me how crazy I am or whether you're on board with this. So, given everything that's happened in the last few months, I'm thinking again, talking Trump, Greenland, shifting changes in Central and South America, etc., etc. In my head, what I've been thinking, two things. Number one is that I think President Trump is, I could be completely wrong on this, is trying to create some form of BRICS for the Americas. Hence why, if you look at a map of where Greenland is, it makes perfect sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I've said, I'm not advocating for it to happen, but if you just look at a map, actually, it makes a lot of sense.
Sure.
So I think that by doing that with, this mineral vault, $12 billion, I think it is, as well, that sort of thing. So I'm thinking that he wants to create again, put America first, put the United States first, a BRICS for the Americas. That's what I think. And secondly, there's a little part of me that wishes and hoped that NATO would have kicked the US out, because then he would have gotten exactly everything that he would have wanted if NATO would have done that. That's just what I've been thinking in the back of my head. You could call me crazy, but any thoughts?
No,
Anything?
I think it's an interesting way of looking at it. I'm not sure I agree with it completely. But what I'll say is what I've been saying is for a while now is that ARC is coming, that there are four regions of the world: Europe, Russia, China, four main powers: Europe, Russia, China, and the United States. Three of them hate the fourth. ARC, America, Russia, China, hate Europe. And with good reason. And Europe refuses to surrender and still thinks that they're going to run some kind of regulatory scheme where they can just fine everybody into debtor's prison. I'm like, you're going to use social media fines, and we're going to use nuclear weapons. So you're going to bring a lawyer to a gunfight.
Yeah.
Yeah. Try that with cowboy culture here in the United States. It's not going to work. Okay. So yes, what Trump is doing is he's securing North America. They call it the Donroe-Doctrine. You can call it the 21st century version of the Monroe Doctrine, the Donroe-Doctrine. and that is that he's going to secure the Western Hemisphere as an American lake, and then allow for the um, the uprising and the uplifting of all of Central and South America by getting rid of all of the Davosian warlords that are running places like Venezuela and Cuba and now Brazil and Mexico and Canada and this and sterilizing natives in Greenland and all of this horrible stuff that they've been doing. That's all going to end. If the trends are correct, and I'm going to throw this is a weird one out there, but I'm going to throw it out there anyway. I mostly buy into the idea that the basically the suspicious observers version of reality that the magnetic field is weakening. We could have a carrying event tomorrow. 20 years from now, we may all be back to pre-electricity. This is all nice, but at the same time, what's happening? Greenland is shedding ice. The Antarctic is adding ice. So the balance of where the heat is distributed on the planet is shifting, is changing. And by historical records, and something I was watching some stuff on this earlier, like Greenland can de-ice very quickly in geologic terms, 10, 20, 30 years. I mean, by 2050, there's a big canal that runs right across. Greenland's not a continent. It's a series of islands underneath. There's a big freaking canal that runs right through the middle of what we call Greenland today. Changing sea routes and everything else like tremendously. Is that what people are, thinking ahead towards? I don't know. But I'm telling you that, if we do avoid something like, we do, so let's say we avoid the Carrington Plus event, which is the thing that's out there. What if we avoid that somehow? Miracle of miracles, if the sun never burps and takes out the grid on the North American continent, we don't blow out all of our chips and everything else, or somehow we harden all of this, or that all the projections are wrong and it's not actually going to happen. I don't know. That's not what my physicist mind says. But let's just say that it's possible. We get through the period, and we get through that period, and the magnetic field starts to strengthen again, and over the course of the rest of the 21st century, blah, and for the next 500 years, Greenland is actually green. And if you're a strategic thinker in the United States, then you want to have control of that, and you don't want to leave that to Canada as a crown asset. Period. You want to set that in motion today. You have to end that old system of money flow today. So you absolutely set that in motion now. The other thing you have to think about, Robert, or the royal you, not just you personally, but the royal you, is that the United States was already conquered by globalists and Marxists and, trainee shitbags and all the rest of it. And now we're trying to get the country back. And the legal framework for the country still exists, but that's de jure. De facto, we've already lost the country, and now we're trying to get it back through legal means and through the use of force and through this and through that. Yeah, we're trying, because there are enough constitutionalists, patriots, whatever you want to call them, now in positions of power to be able to take the country back and kick these people back to the high table where they belong, and kick some of them off the high table because they never should have fucking been there in the first place. That's what's coming. Okay. And that's what I see Trump doing. And I would rather look in the future, I would rather look for ARC versus a kind of American BRICS, because the dollar is going to be reinforced at a digital level as long as it's not controlled by the existing central bank architecture and the existing post-World War II institutional order. The IMF, the WHO, the World Bank, the UN, everything else. Trump is doing everything imaginable to just destroy all of them. Is he going to leave NATO? No, I think he's going to hold on to NATO until Russia, Ukraine settle a peace deal, because the U.S. being in NATO is the only thing stopping the crazy assholes at 10 Downing Street in Brussels and Paris and everything else from attacking, from moving troops in and then, forcing Putin to nuke Kiev. Nick, that's the part that, because this is the part that like so many geopolitical commentators miss about all of this, because they're still stuck in this 2015, 2010, 2005 GWAT mindset that the United States is the bad guy here and the aggressor, when the United States wants out of all this. And they keep trying to fit Donald Trump into that mold. And then they analyze all of his moves like, oh, these are all just 94D. These are the people playing 94D chess, trying to undermine what Trump has literally said completely. I want all the wars to end. I want to clean up every one of these hotspots that have been left open, these open wounds around the world, left by the British and the French and the Spanish and the Portuguese and the Dutch and everybody else for 500 fucking years. We're trying to get rid of all of them. And they're the ones tying themselves into knots by reading some readout from a call between some third-rate functionary and some other third-rate functionary in the presence of this neocon at a negotiation, and then saying, see, Trump is trying to betray us all. I'm like, really? Fuck is wrong with you? Like, can you not have, we have 99% of the evidence is this, and you're picking out this little 1% and going, no, that's actually what's going on. I'm like, okay. And I'm trying not to name names here. These are people I consider my friends. These are people I consider like they should be smarter than this. And they're crashing out left and right because they don't want to see it. Because for whatever reason, this is their imprinting. As I said 20 minutes ago or whatever, when we reach, and I said this a year ago, as a matter of fact, I did it like every podcast I did in January, February of last year. I said the same thing. I said 6 months from now, you're going to watch and start watching people crash out left and right because their model of how the universe operates or the way the geopolitics operates is wrong. They're going to stick to it and they're going to crash out and they're going to become less and less and less interesting and more and more and more strident, trying to defend a position that's indefensible because there's going to be an overwhelming amount of evidence to the contrary. Because at the end of the day, we all revert to type. I've told you what my type is. I'm an American patriot who loves Patton, who thinks that Patton is one of the greatest Americans who ever walked the face of the earth, because Patton was the one who understood that you fight wars to win, not to kill. And you fight wars to liberate the tyrannized and to defend the innocent, which we didn't do at the end of World War II. We left Eastern Europe to the fucking Bolsheviks. Patton was right that we didn't actually achieve victory in World War II because the goal of the United States entering World War II was to free Eastern Europe from fucking tyranny of the Nazis. But handing it to the Bolsheviks was no win. And then we got the Cold War, then we got this, then we got this, and all the rest of it. So, like at the end of the, so at all of this, the older I get, like that's my imprinting. That's who I am. And everything that's happened up until this period of history, last 7 or 8 years, in my life is shameful to be an American. Shameful. Well, do you not believe in, redemption? Do you not believe that we can, fix and make atone for past sins? Who else is going to be capable of doing that? Or do you just want to punish? Because you're a bunch of pre-Christian fucking, monkey worshipping assholes. Babies, blood drinking assholes. Is that who you are? I don't know. I believe in redemption. I mean, I call myself a freaking Christian, but dude, like they redeemed fucking Darth Vader for Christ's sake, we can redeem anybody. To tell you where my imprinting goes back to, right? The Jedi might be a bunch of retarded Buddhists, but at the end of the day, Star Wars is an incredibly Christian story, right? And so is Lord of the Rings. And oh, by the way, if you don't think that people really want that in their life, why is the reissue of the Lord of the Rings doing billions of dollars at the box office? Fellowship of the Ring is the $900 million freaking dollars at the box office in 2026, 25 years after it came out, and everybody's watched them 100 times. And yet, an entire generation is going to watch. My daughter went to see them twice in the theaters. Okay. Something is happening here. And what we just saw with the last release of the Epstein files tells you that that world is over. Because all we did was find out. What did we really find out? Oh, these people that are ruling the world are even worse than we thought they were. And we thought they were pretty freaking bad. So now what are we going to do? By comparison, Donald Trump looks like a fucking saint. So you tell me whether or not, so give you an idea of why, so then that begs the next question. And I think we should probably leave it here, and I'll leave you with this. This is why we ask the question, why did Trump then fight the Epstein files? He was using them for the last year as a leverage to try and force terms of surrender to end this war with the elites with as minimum of bloodshed. And I think he offered them the Putin deal. You get to keep all the money you stole, blah, 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 blah. We're going to end all these institutions. We're going to do this, this, and this. You guys get to stay out of politics, go back to your castles. Your time is over, but we're not going to let's end this and move on. Let's rebuild the world and let us rebuild the world. And hey, if we don't do that, and for that reason, I'll not release all this information that makes you look like the worst fucking people who've ever walked the face of the earth. And they said no. He offered that to the king last summer. He's offered it to Davos. He's offered it to von der Leyen. He's offered it to Brussels. He's offered it to all of them. They all said no. They want to fight it out to the end. You're going to fight it out to the end? Well, there's 8 billion people on this planet who do not want to be, who are carbon that do not want to be reduced. It's us versus you. I'm taking our odds. And I don't give a shit how many people have. And they said, I don't care how many people have to die. Well, we have to get comfortable with the idea that if we're going to win this, we're going to pledge our lives and our sacred honor to it in whatever way we can. Now, it doesn't mean we're going to pick up rifles and go start shooting people. What it means is you're going to pledge your life and your sacred honor to do the work necessary to achieve that future. We all have a part to play in that. Mine happens to be, doing this shit, right? That's my job. Your job is to help, whatever you do in your day job plus this podcast. That's your job. We all have a part to play. And it could be, as simple as being the best stock manager imaginable at your local fucking Walmart, but we're going to do it. Mm-hmm. Okay. You know what I mean? Everybody has a part to play. I'm going to be the best goddamn dad that I can be. I'm going to be the, whatever. Let's start there. And there's so many things to fix in your own communities that immunize your communities against whatever they're going to do next. Does it mean getting yourself into shape and being ready to be deputized by the local sheriff to kick Antifa out of your community? Maybe. Does that mean you have to, drop and give me 20? Maybe. It's up to you where you are. So let's just do that. And let's figure out what that is. And again, drop and give me 20 as a metaphor. Okay. Mm-hmm. So, all right. That's what I got for you today, Robert. Just think about it that way. And I think that that's what's happening with the Epstein files. I think he finally said, okay, fine. Let's go to war. Now you're going to watch Trump push the pace. And then those pollsters that are crashing out today, that brings all the way back to the beginning. They're going to look like morons. They're going to look like agenda-driven, paid assholes. Because if Trump leads that way for the next 9 months, there ain't no way he can lose the midterm, especially if they pass the SAVE Act. They pass the SAVE Act and they enforce voter ID and they kick all these people out. Forget it. Like the country, we're going to find out real quick that the country's 65-35, and that's that. And he's going to walk into January 2027 with 85 or 100 seat majority in the House, and they're going to pass everything, including like getting rid of all the bad constitutional amendments, and there's a whole lot of those. that need to go away, including the direct election of senators and everything else. And that would make my freaking day. Are you kidding me? You want to come back next year when we have the possibility of getting the 17th Amendment? We can restore like the proper balance of powers in the United States. You want to talk about how much of an asshole I'm going to be, like with a big smile on my face, like, fuck you, that's why American. Like, dude, I'm going to be, my background's going to be a screaming eagle and, on a rocket ship with the American flag on it. It's going to be great. It's going to be great. And everybody should cheer at that point, because what that, of course, means is that we're going to roll these people into history, and we're going to put them behind us. We're going to move on. Okay.
I, Tom, as you said, a perfect place to leave that. But I always like to give people the opportunity to say how they can be found. I'll link to everything that you say in the show notes. So if people want to
Please.
find out more about you, how do they do that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, TFL 1728 on Twitter is probably the most is the biggest thing. If you want to support the work, and you can't get enough of this, then you can do the Patreon/Gold Goats and Guns. We do twice weekly market reports, a monthly newsletter with a full portfolio and everything else. It's very cheap. It's incredibly cheap, actually. And TomLuongo.me, which is where we post the podcast, that the Gold Goats and Goats podcast that we put out on an infrequent basis whenever I need to have a meaningful conversation with one of my very good friends. So there we go.
Awesome. I'll put all of that on there. Highly recommend you go and subscribe to the podcast and so forth. Tom, been a pleasure as always, and look forward to catching up
Yep.
later on in the year.
Absolutely. Thank you, Robert. You have a great weekend. We'll talk soon.